Welcome everyone. My name is Crystal Holland and I'm joining you today all as a moderator for our fireside chat about cybersecurity in a post-COVID world. Leading today's discussion, we have Bruce Huang, Director of Information Technology Programs at Harvard Extension School, and David Koss, Vice President of Cyber and IT Risk at the Federal Reserve Bank of the New York Supervision Group. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over some housekeeping items. We encourage everyone via Zoom to submit any questions through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen throughout the chat if any questions arise. And for those of you joining us on Facebook, please use the comment options as those questions will be monitored as well. At the end of this webinar, we will have about 30 minutes to answer any related questions to the webinar. And with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Bruce and David, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Well, welcome to our first monthly CXO Fireside Chat. So today we're absolutely honored to have David Koss joining us. David and I know each other for some time now, and we went to school together, and as well as that, we both are former IBMers. David currently is the Vice President, like Crystal said, at the Federal Reserve Bank at New York, and focus on the security aspect. But before that, he was actually recently the Chief Information Security Officer at IBM and a global partner of the IBM Cloud Group. And as before that, he was like the Chief Information Security Officer as well as Elsevier, and then it was like Freddie Mac and then Morgan Stanley. So it's been in the financial industry, right? And for quite some times now. And welcome, David. Good to see you again.
Bruce, thanks for having me. So always happy to participate. And as Bruce mentioned, I am with the Federal Reserve on the regulatory side of the house. So I am off duty today. So any opinion that I express does not represent that of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York or the Federal Reserve System, but always happy to participate in things that are advancing the field of information security and risk management.
Thank you, David. And everyone knows what we're going to do today, right? In terms of the conversation, we're gonna basically take a look back, right, in the history, in the memory land, and that we're going to try to recall some of the challenges that as we respond to COVID-19. But then we're going to shift the conversations into the future and what the future is will look like for us, and especially in the financial industry as related to cybersecurity and or banking in general. So David, I mean, last March, right? I mean, it was about a year ago that we all got the order that, hey, pack your bag and go home. Overnight, the entire country basically that went online. Right, and but thanks to online technology, thanks to telecommunications, and thanks to the internet, and our bank, our financial institution never did stop, right, and still functioning, and there's a good things about it, and but at the same time that overnight, and you have every single bankers, and every single one that approving your loan, and everyone that handling your money, it all went online, right, and they all doing it from home, and that actually bring into a lot of challenges into the industry and in cybersecurity issues and challenges as well. So what did the initial response to COVID-19 look like? Right, for the financial institutions and the Federal Reserve Supervision Group? Now, this is a huge umbrella question. So maybe we can start by sharing that initial challenges, right? What are some of the initial challenges as we pack our bag and go home and get online?
Thanks, Bruce. So some of the things that, as you look at it from the aspects that went well, I think, given the extreme short notice that all industries had of getting their people home, from the ability of getting everybody home, I'd say most of the institutions, most industries did really well with that. And for the most part, thankfully the infrastructure held up with connectivity to be able to support capacity for a lot of remote workers. Some of the things that didn't go so well or highlighted, areas for improvement as you look at it is, all of a sudden, there was huge competition for assets. So not everybody had laptops to work from home or equipment set up to work from home. So now all of a sudden, you have whole industries competing to get equipment, to get their individuals home set up and back online from that aspect of it, as well as when you look at things like, not only financial services, but all industries do a fair amount of outsourcing to third parties. So all of a sudden, the increased reliance on the third parties, and now the third parties are all facing those same challenges where they had to get their staff home. Are they even equipped to do telework and remote work from those aspects of it? So that generated some initial challenges that organizations had to really start addressing.
So it's been a year. It's exactly a year, right? And so that was the initial challenges. So how did the challenges evolve?
And it's a good question. So when you look at it, well, one, it's still hard to believe it's a year now from that aspect of it. I think when this was all going on, I think everybody was like, we'll be back at work in a month. But when you start looking at it, many of those institutions and many organizations as a whole had to reevaluate their use of emerging technologies to solve some problems. Because when you look at now that they got everybody home, they got connectivity, they got assets, now all of a sudden they had to revisit, do they have the capability to manage all of these devices, to push patches, to push security updates, to do security monitoring and logging. So part of it was, as everybody got sent home from that aspect of it, now initially, there was a lot of additional risk that was identified and accepted by organizations. And now, organizations that we've been, at this for a year, organizations have to revisit it from the perspective of, now this is almost business as usual. So how have you gone back and addressed those risks? So, when you talk about financial services or highly regulated individuals within financial services, where, text messages need to be monitored, phone conversations may need to be monitored and recorded, it forced a lot of organizations to have an interim gap where they look for other technologies that weren't based on their campus as a way of enforcing and maintaining those controls from that. So that really took some time for organizations to adjust to from that aspect of it. And the other component of it too is we kind of mentioned that race to get everybody set up from working from home, get them the proper assets. So part of that was then, it goes back to some of what's old is new, is how are they doing asset management? How are they tracking those assets? Do they have the appropriate security controls enforced on them? Do they have the appropriate monitoring around those assets? And then some of the more interesting things that we saw later too, as we got into a year in it, why the assets got deployed, how do you recover those technology assets that have corporate property on them? Because we've seen turnover in the industry in general, where, even while people are working from home, they're still switching jobs. And now you have corporate assets with intellectual property that belongs to one institution. How did you make arrangements to recover them, and how have you been recovering them? How have you been tracking them? So those are some of the other aspects of it that's evolved. And I think what's evolved also is when you look at, third-party risk management as a whole, some things needed to get highlighted. You look at, how dependent are you on their staff? How dependent are they on their staffing, from absenteeism or anything like that? And what kind of contractual obligations and agreements do you have with these, organizations or institutions? Because in some cases, we saw organizations that may have been pushed to the brink where all of a sudden they're trying to invoke things like force majeure, saying that they may not be able to adhere to the original security requirements or the original deal that was outlined in the contract. And if you're a highly regulated organization, that could be problematic. So you need means of addressing that and dealing with how do you, address that if you need to switch third-party service providers.
So we always think about from like a virus, antivirus, and the cybersecurity and the cybersecurity attack, right? And you think of like it's a competition between a bad mathematician and a good mathematicians, right? And that see who gets ahead. And so it's been a year, and we've been facing challenges and we're solving challenges, and but neither side stop, right? And so how has the threat landscape evolved?
So it's kind of redefined. Well, some of it has been around insider threat. And if you're in business and you have employees, you have insiders from that perspective. But now when all of a sudden these insiders are now widely dispersed and not on your corporate campuses, things like, monitoring for security risks, monitoring for data loss, those become more challenging, as well as a lot of times if you have outsource arrangements where maybe the subcontractors are used to only having that level of access from your corporate campus. And now how do you trust that access is okay from remote environments or even from remote countries at that point in time? So those are some of the things that have kind of broadened how you look at insiders. And then, as you mentioned, some of it is, the threat continues. If anything, social engineering, phishing are always huge vectors. If anything, COVID made it a right target environment to increase the phishing or the social engineering of potential individuals, because everybody's either looking at COVID data, wanting test results or wanting to be able to get vaccinated. So a lot of the increase in phishing attacks have been under that guise or under that umbrella. But in general, with everybody working from home, people have to balance a lot of things. You have to focus on your home life, your work life, and there's a tendency for people to get distracted. So it might make social engineering or phishing campaigns even easier. So that's kind of continued. The other interesting development that we've seen is really the concept of cyber resiliency has become more and more important for organizations and institutions as a whole, because the attacks that we've seen have gotten more and more destructive. So really, especially within the financial center or financial sector, you have to really look at it as, do you have the ability to recover from a destructive attack? So in other words, if your online presence get interrupted, and if maybe your backup that's online and connected gets interrupted or encrypted, how do you recover from that? What kind of plans do you have? And I see on the side there that says some of the intellectual property could be at risk. So anything depending upon, from an intellectual property point of view, depends on what kind of sector the individual's in. So it could be something as basic as customer lists that belong to an organization. It could be proprietary processes, procedures, policies, how an organization works. So any of these things could be considered, intellectual property or property of the company that the individual works for. And you still have that unfettered access to it from a remote location. So now, when these things a lot of times are saved, maybe on the network, but also saved on that individual's home-based asset, part of it is how do you make sure you recover that if it's a work asset, and other things like that. If you're allowing people to access the work environment from a personally owned device, then you have other security constraints that you have to deal with, of how are you doing that virtual delivery or how are you monitoring that connection back into your corporate network. So those are a couple of things. We could spend pretty much almost a day on intellectual property and the nuances around that.
That is not just the financial institutions, right? And that is any business is facing in any organizations. And like I said, that overnight, and we packed our bag in March last year and get online. And there are many organizations that they don't have devices that enough to hand out to everyone to get online. So we enable employees to use their own devices to get into the companies or the organizations infrastructures and network and so forth. And so that is definitely a challenge that the organization faces. And I assume that a lot of that probably have to deal with from a control and compliance and policies kind of perspective, right? And but what about emerging risks, right? And so if we think the bad guys never stop, and so what are some of the emerging risks organizations are facing?
Well, ransomware continues to be a large problem for organizations and institutions, regardless of whether they're financial services or healthcare or any industry. I think everyone has seen ransomware attacks, and they're very effective. And a lot of times, those impacted institutions wind up having to pay the ransom. And that kind of goes back to what I talked about earlier with the cyber resiliency point of it, because a lot of times when organizations have traditionally done business continuity and disaster recovery, you usually look at that through the lens of, I lost this one system, I lost this one database, or I lost email. How long is it going to take me to recover that system? Ransomware changes the paradigm because it essentially locks everything up. And now you're faced with, how long is it going to take you to restore each individual system and rebuild that whole network, which could take weeks to months, depending on the complexity of it. Or in some cases, organizations have been forced to pay to recover because either they don't have that capability, or it's a matter of getting them back online, within 8 hours, versus 2 weeks. So those are some of the things that we're going to see persist because how very effective it is. So organizations need to really continue to think through how they're going to address ransomware. And some of the other things that we've seen too as interesting attacks, when you look at what's publicly available from SolarWinds or things like that, not only was it vulnerabilities exploited for them to get in, but when you look at some of what was at the heart of SolarWinds, it kind of goes back to not only third parties, but if you're in-house and you develop your own code, how do you protect that code? What are you doing? Are you doing code signing? Are you using open source? How are you protecting the code to make sure that somebody doesn't put bad code into your code, and then when you push out the update, now all of a sudden they inherited whatever are in those lines of code. So part of it goes back to how do you trust but verify your third parties from a code point of view, especially if you're using software or applications from them that have privileged access to your environment, or if you're developing your own applications, are your developers using open source software? How do you trust that? How do you validate what's in some of those public code repositories? So those are really more focused areas. It's kind of given us to address, and it kind of goes back to what kind of secure software development lifecycle does the institution or organization have, and that impacts whether you're developing it yourself or whether you're using a third party. So that's some of the areas.
Yeah, this is very interesting, right? Go back to the poll that we did earlier. And also what we see from Burning Glass is saying that what are the top 10 cybersecurity skills, right? And that it talks about cloud infrastructure security, talks about application development security. In fact, application development security is being one of the high ranked cybersecurity skills, right? And that in the SolarWinds situation kind of drive home the need. And so so what about from a regulatory perspective? What are some of the key regulatory trends going forward here?
So you've kind of touched on it, from the point of view when you look at things like cloud utilization. There's the FFIEC joint statement on cloud that's been released. So it's more taking a look at how do we lay out from a regulatory perspective, what are our expectations around safety and soundness as you adopt some of these emerging technologies? So for instance, a lot of times, cloud actually to do it effectively often results in a step change in how an organization works. It's not just a technology change, it changes business processes, it changes governance. So part of it is looking at it from a safety and soundness lens, where we look at it is there a linkage? Does the organization have good governance over cloud? Do they understand what the potential business processes are impacted? How does it change how security, how IT operations, how everybody needs to work together from that point of view? And do they have a plan on what's going to the cloud? Large organizations or large institutions often have complex technology portfolios. So part of it is how do you have a measured thought process on what are you moving to a cloud to adopt these emerging technologies? Similar things, whether you're thinking about how do you adopt blockchain or how do you adopt AI and ML from that point of view. A lot of organizations want to use that technology to help out with efficiency, operations, and everything. Part of it is now, what does it mean from a safety and soundness point of view? How do you check AI and ML for bias? How do you make sure that if the model is drifting, that you can identify it? Are you able to monitor to make sure that the model doesn't become corrupted? Things like that. That's kind of just touching on it. We could spend a whole day on really looking at the emerging technologies from that point of view. But we want to encourage organizations to use new and emerging technologies. It just has to be a thoughtful approach on how they start adopting it. And as you mentioned too, with the upskilling. So part of it is looking at internally, do you have the right skills for the technologies that you're adopting? You can't always rely on your third-party provider to have all of the skills that you need or have the institutional knowledge. So part of it is, and I've had to do this in my former CISO role as well, look internally at my security teams and start thinking about how do I upskill my teams? What retraining needs to be done? Because when you think about cloud versus your traditional data center operations, where you're moving from, okay, hard physical appliances to now infrastructure as code, there's retraining that needs to be involved. So now all of a sudden, somebody that was used to dealing with appliances and maybe ACLs, now all of a sudden has to understand what does infrastructure as code mean, and how do you deploy and how do you provision those virtual cloud type data containers or operations, things like that.
But this is interesting. So I believe that the statistics shows that I think some of the forecasts, right, saying that there's going to be like 3.5 million jobs in cybersecurity. It's not going to be able to fill by next year, by this year, something like that, right? And so I know that in the state of Massachusetts alone, in the last 12 months, there's 9,000 cybersecurity jobs open. And in the US, it's like over 300,000 cybersecurity jobs unfilled. And so I had a conversations, I had a session with the Southern California CIOs back in July last year. And so everyone's concerned about skills and for their cybersecurity initiatives. So are we out of that? How is that impacting the public sectors? And that is it the same as the private industries? Or?
So I mean, the war for talent, as you mentioned, really impacts all sectors. Public, private. All of that is important to address from that perspective. So as you look at that, it's really important to figure out, okay, what kind of talent do I need? How do I retain my existing talent that I have? And how do I kind of continue to train and keep up with it? And one of the reasons I like and enjoy cyber and risk so much is because, well, from a intellectual curiosity, it's one of those things that you have to just keep learning and keep ahead of what's going on from that aspect of it. But the other opportunity is all of these unfilled positions that are out there represent huge opportunities for people that want to enter the field, from that point of view, because there is no one path into cybersecurity. There's multiple pathways, multiple career options. There's people, as you mentioned, that specialize in secure application development. There's people that specialize in the infrastructure aspects of it or cloud aspects of it. So there are so many ways to get into information security that people can find good roles without having to say, okay, I need to master all domains of information security to get a job.
Yep, skills definitely a issue that for the cybersecurity initiatives, and that is the CIOs that I mentioned earlier that in the session that was in back in July last year echoed the same thing, that a lot of upskilling needs to be done and in order to satisfy that skills requirement. So let's look in the future a little bit, right? And so the fintech industry has been wonderful and is a new field and a great area to get into. And so as a startup guy, today, if I want to start an internet company and they're doing something that taking money and then escorting people's money and then paying or whatever, and technology-wise can be done pretty simple, pretty easy, right? And but is that a new bank startup, or is it an internet startup? So I mean, we have similar conversations that like when Uber first started, right? Is that a taxi company? Is it a transportation company, or is it an internet company? And so so I think this is going to be basically similar in the banking industry and the financial institutions. Right, and so anyone can be a bank. So, what is the future of the banking industry in the United States?
So, fintech definitely presents some very interesting perspectives, because when you take a look at it, that's leveraging some of the newest technology to address some of the challenges that financial services have faced throughout history. Whether it's how to do real-time payments better, how to help people that are unbanked get to banks. So the opportunities are significant. And I think some of the challenges exist from the perspective of, do fintechs disrupt banks? Do they partner with banks? Do they grow to the size where they become a bank? There are some fintechs that actually have become banks and things like that, from that perspective, where they've filed and gone through the appropriate protocol for that. So part of it is, I think there's lots of opportunity in there, because when you take a look at large institutions or all institutions, you all have some kind of technology debt. And as you adopt these newer and emerging technologies, part of it is to look at how do you reduce your technology debt while getting closer to your customers. So fintech brings some of the best of breed technology to it. The key considerations that need to be looked at, though, are still from the point of view of, when does it become a critical service either to the financial services industry? Does it become, as you mentioned, a bank itself and fall under regulation? And at what point do we look at it from the privacy and the banking type aspects of it? So there's various elements that still have to be evaluated. I think the benefit there is in some cases they're partnering with large financial institutions that can offer them, guidance around regulatory aspects of it. Because as you know, with any startup type of environment, the first thing is kind of getting your first sales out there, getting the prototype out, getting people onboarded. It's not always your first consideration is how do I deal with security, privacy, and risk from those aspects of it. And we've seen, regardless of industry, all kinds of startups that have come up in that space that have had various challenges. I think it's going to continue to be a booming industry, and I think it's going to contribute to significantly how banking changes in the future. So that's kind of the to be determined of what it will really look like 5 years from now.
It's definitely amazing, exciting industry, and that you see some other countries is like in Asia and in Europe, and that especially in Asia and China and other countries, that you have more people using the digital currency instead of the paper currency, right? And now, when you think about that, it's like technology-wise, and why can't we do that? And we absolutely can. I mean, Apple Pay and Google Pay, Android Pay and Samsung Pay, right? And we can do more. But the only problem is that when you do that and you're exposing people's spending behavior and their financial privacy, and so a lot of the privacy situation, a lot of privacy challenges that needed to overcome before. E-currency, right? And that the same thing is in cryptocurrency. So any thoughts on regulations or compliances in that area?
I can't make an official comment on it, but I think we're going to see continued interest in that space. I think like anything else, when you deal with, whether you're talking about cryptocurrency or any aspect like that, part of it as it becomes mainstream, you still need to be able to address typical banking type challenges. How do you do anti-money laundering? How do you do know your customer? So there's elements that need to be addressed as these become more mainstream from that aspect of it. So I'd say it's still going to be a keen area of focus for more learning and understanding, and looking at what problems is it really trying to solve from that point of view, and how. Because as you mentioned, there's already lots of cryptocurrencies. So the question is, what's the real problem that it's trying to solve? And then, how is it going to be regulated or monitored or looked at by different governments from that point of view? So I think that is going to be a continued hot area of focus. And I suspect that there should be interesting changes throughout the next couple of years.
Okay, all right. So I want to ask you a question that, so know you for some times, and that I see that you were like senior information's leaders, right, in organizations, and from CIOs, chief information security officers, from Freddie Mac and to Elsevier and to IBM, and now over here at the Federal Reserve Bank in New York and Supervision Group. So is there any advice, any recommendations that for people that, hey, I have a desire, I wanted to become a CIO, I want to become a chief information security officer? Is there a career planning or a blueprint or roadmap to follow? What's your advice? What's your recommendation?
So I'd say my path to probably to CISO look more like a squiggly line than a traditional chart that we're used to from that aspect of it. But I think, as we look at it, there definitely are. So the nice thing about information security, IT risk, compliance, you can play to your strength in that space. So you don't have to decide that you want to be a CISO. If you're going the route of being a CISO, I'd say more now than ever, you need the correct ability to really understand the business that you're in, because it's becoming more and more of a business enabler rather than just, you can't say no to everything, because when you do that as a security function, people just find ways around it. So you need to look at it from the perspective of, the CISO as a senior leader is probably reporting to the board, meeting with the audit committee, meeting with the senior executive team, and that person there is to help protect the organization that they're working for, but it's also there to help enable the organization. So at the end of the day, it's about understanding the business, looking at it through a risk lens, and helping enable them. So there are pathways there through business management skills, through leadership skills. So you need more than just cybersecurity from that point of view. I'd say now early on, I'd say CISOs used to be purely highly technical. And as the field started getting more business focused, more senior executive focused, there's been a greater need to really understand the business that you're in or you're supporting, as well as the board aspects of it. But when you look at the other functions too that are within information security, the nice thing is you could be an application security specialist. You could be somebody that's a pen tester. You could be somebody that's doing policy and compliance and audit. So there are so many avenues and opportunities, and that's probably the other reason why there's so many unfilled jobs right now from that perspective, because there's so much work to do in this field in general.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And thank you for sharing. And I got a few more questions, but I think what I would like to do is to get our audience involved, right? And so maybe that we can open it up and see if we can take a few questions from our audience here. And I believe that Crystal going to help us with that.
Sure. Happy to take questions.
Yes, sure thing. So we have had a good amount of questions come in through the chat. So thank you everyone for using the Q&A. I guess I'll just start. The first question is, what is the best way to transition into cybersecurity job? And like, what are the careers in cybersecurity? And like, how long do you need to study it before you can begin to practice it?
So I'd say there are basic level certifications that individuals can obtain that should take them under a year to get from that aspect of it. Some organizations even offer on-the-job training aspects of it. So it really depends. Is it somebody that's already in the technical side of the house that's just wanting to kind of now start specializing? I think in that case it's even easier. But it maybe it's somebody in policy compliance or somebody that's in another part of the business that wants to come into security as well, because there's very beneficial aspects of that as well. Because if you're a good writer and a good communicator, policy, audit, risk and compliance, there you need to be able to take these technical terms and really explain them in a way that's not so technical from that aspect of it. So it really depends upon what, I guess, field that individual is in, because there's multiple ways to it from that point of view.
Awesome. Thank you, David. The next question we received was, how does the blockchain technology help prevent cyber attacks into the financial service industry?
So blockchain is interesting from the point of view that you have to look at it for, what problem are you trying to solve is one of the key things. When you look at blockchain, where you have maybe as a source of digital identity would be one area of interest right now. When you look at that of how do you get an individual to have maybe a true digital identity that's on a blockchain, where now all of a sudden, just like you have a passport or you have your other identification, maybe now then when you go to apply for a home loan or you go to get an auto loan, now you temporarily give somebody access to everything about you on that blockchain. That might be a means of doing that as well, rather than, if you have all your credit reports frozen, you have to call up each group, get them unfrozen, you have to do other things. So blockchain from that point of view could be a source of true digital identity, and some governments are exploring things like that as well. Other aspects of it are, blockchain's currently in use through some of the like WeTrade to reduce counterparty shipping risk from that point of view, where it speeds up things. So this way, where instead of having to put money in escrow for a certain transaction, now once things clear, the transaction occurs that much faster. So it really depends upon what are you trying to use blockchain to do, because there's supply chain aspects of it, of how do you use it to verify, maybe pharma manufacturing from end to end without tampering. So it really depends upon what problem are you trying to solve from that aspect of it. From a hyperledger point of view, or any ledger point of view, that there's a lot that can be done with the financial services, but part of it is looking at, if you're a large existing institution already, how does it integrate in with your current technology, and potentially what technologies do you need to sunset within that? I think that leads to Bruce's question earlier of if you're a fintech that's starting up with something focused in that area, oftentimes, it's easier to come up as a challenger because you don't necessarily have to deal with a complex technology portfolio of how do you fit it in.
Thank you, David. We have a question from Facebook. How can you advise investors losing money to scammers?
So, I mean, that's part of the age-old quandary. The problem is from the phishing. So it depends on what the construct is. Unfortunately, the scammers are going to continue to be around. It's one of those things that as long as there's an opportunity for somebody to make money in a country probably where there's no extradition, you're going to see cyber crime from that point of view. So part of it is looking at how do we get better from a personal point of view of not clicking on emails or things like that. But the problem is when it comes to social engineering, it's human nature usually for most people to want to be able to help. So when you look at it, social engineers and scammers prey on that type of position. So part of it is, how do you, keep your institution smarter about that? Whether it's do you increase training awareness? Does the training awareness you do for your institution do things also that will help bring it home to the home users on the home front as well? And then part of it is, do you practice good, I guess, cyber hygiene yourself, where not maybe using your work issued device for personal things, or not, letting your kids use your work issued device or things like that as well. It's one of those challenges that, it's whack-a-mole. As soon as you stop some of it, there are going to be creative ways that come back up as well.
Yes, and I kind of feel like this question goes hand in hand. We had a question come in that said, are the chances of money laundering higher with traditional banking or digital banking?
So that's a good question. So it really depends, from that point of view. So when you look at, what's digital banking mean versus online banking or things like that. So when you look at, digital banking, when I think about digital banking, I think really about how do you take all of the end-to-end processes that exist in a traditional bank and make them digital. Whereas, a lot of institutions have online banking, which is really, okay, we've taken some of our core services and made them internet facing. So part of that looks at how do you maybe leverage technologies, and maybe this is an opportunity to leverage AI and ML to get better at recognizing potential signs of money laundering. How do you leverage some of this technology to do better customer verification? So there's pros and cons to it. So I wouldn't say it necessarily makes, digital banking doesn't increase the likelihood of anti-money laundering. But when you look at it within things of like cryptocurrencies, you have to be able to make sure that how do you apply what's expected in anti-money laundering to cryptocurrencies. So there are ways to do it with some, but not all, where this way you can look at, where the cryptocurrency moves, you can maybe trace it to an exchange, you can trace it to a wallet, and then you could probably put a confidence interval around it of, does it go through a mixer or tumbler? Because mixers or tumblers are used for, let's say, shadier types of activities, from that point. So there are ways to do it. And part of it is you see new tech coming online to help address these challenges.
Awesome. Yeah. This, I feel like you kind of answered it, but maybe just go into a little bit more depth. But it says, how do companies act to create more trust between customers in their technology utilization?
That's a really good question. So part of that, I would say probably clarity of how they're using their customers' information. So that goes back to and also a whole nother discipline that goes hand in hand with security, which is privacy. Looking at, what customer data are you collecting? When you look at, there's a lot of states have privacy laws right now. There's more than 80 countries that have privacy laws that have impact on either data sovereignty from where I can locate that data or what types of data I can collect. So part of it is, transparency on what you're doing with the customer data from the point of view, how it's being utilized, and, what steps are you taking to protect, that data.
Awesome. Okay, so we had a question come in from Alex, and he said, how would you advise getting into cybersecurity? And he also said, is it easier to get a job since he doesn't have like degree or experience, or is there kind of a better route that people should be taking when they want to get into cybersecurity?
So I'd say part of the beauty of cybersecurity is I think it's one of these disciplines that has highlighted the fact that not everybody needs to have a college degree to get into that space. So if you're strong in coding or strong in application development, there's some elements where there's free classes in how do I code securely from that aspect to start doing that and getting that under your belt. And then there's some baseline certifications that are offered through like ISC squared, ISACA, SANS, that really help focus, and be happy to provide you a list with some of those organizations that you can share later on from that aspect of it. So there's lots of elements where you can get in having no deep experience, because what will happen is there's kind of the field for the generalists where you start taking courses on what are the 10 key domains of information security, and you start learning the fundamentals around that. And then you can start thinking, well, do I want to be an analyst, where now I'm starting to look at some of these incidents coming in. Am I good in the development area? So maybe I should focus on how do you develop secure code? Otherwise, do I start looking at training and awareness, where you start helping educate the employees of the institutions not to fall victim to some of the phishings and scams and things like that. So I have to say, there's lots of avenues and lots of opportunity in cybersecurity. So it ranges from ones where you need to be a good communicator and have good fundamental understanding to really highly technical roles as well. So I'd say it has such a broad spectrum of opportunity.
That's awesome. What would you say is the best approach to secure the usage of risk assessment of open source library usage for internal development?
So that kind of goes back to when we were talking about SolarWinds. So that is a challenging one from their point of view. So part of it is looking at, well, what open source repositories are your developers using from that aspect of it. And there's various tools, I won't say the manufacturers, that allow you to scan that code from that point of view, but they allow you to scan it from everything to pick up, what type of open source license is it? Because there's some that have an impact on whether or not, if you're developing intellectual property, that you may have to share back or contribute back to that open source, depending upon what the license of it is. But this way you can scan it and start looking at it and make a determination. Is that a library that you want to use from that point of view? Do you need to bring some of those libraries in-house and start protecting some of those, maybe using private code repositories from that aspect? So there's several ways to do it. There's tools out there, and it's similar also when you use like open APIs. I think it's when you look at some of the, I believe it's ISACA, maybe they have guidelines for securing APIs that are out there. So you want to look at that as you use APIs, because you're adopting cloud or connecting things. You might have good security hygiene for your programs that you control, but as you start using open source APIs, just like open source code, you want to make sure that you evaluate them to make sure that there's no potential risk or vulnerability within that as well.
It's a great response. I feel like I'm learning a lot myself today, so this is awesome.
Bruce knows I could probably talk about this stuff all day.
Going great. We've got lots of questions coming in, and I do just want to make a note that if we don't get to all the questions today, we do regret, but always feel free to reach out to our enrollment and services team, and they'll be happy to help. But our next question is, how would you be able to deal with people forging digital currency? Bitcoin has made a method, but it has been shown to affect innocent people negatively.
So that's a long, that can be quite a technical topic. So all right, where to start on that? So part of that, when you look at, I guess, cryptocurrency, when you look at things that are on the blockchain in general, so part of that looks at node control, like where do all those nodes exist? So part of having a distributed technology like that, where no one person owns control over everything, you have to look at how are the nodes dispersed, and you would want to make sure that no one individual owns 51% of those nodes, because then they could negatively impact the transaction. But to get into the details of forging crypto, I can't even think of how I can address that question in a short answer. Could be a good one for a course there, Bruce.
Okay, so we'll do probably one more question. Do you think that increased privacy makes tracing or attributing cybercrime to an individual or group more difficult?
So I would say in general, no, from that point of view, because when you address privacy as, what type of information are you protecting? There's definitely benefit from that point of view in knowing how organizations or institutions are using your private information. It's important for an individual, when you look at it for protection of the greater good. Now, criminals, cyber criminals will always cloak themselves under things Because when you talk about use of technologies like Tor or other things like that, were put out there to be able to have people communicate in typically repressed societies or repressed governments, those tools are also easily adopted by, cyber criminals. So part of it is, society advances protections for, society as a whole. There are also, I guess, unintended uses for some of that technology as well. So I think, cyber criminals will always advance and look at how can they use encryption to their benefit, how can they use certain digital currencies to their benefit. So it's one of those things that you can't stop advancing privacy goals from the perspective that there's still always going to be somebody looking for an angle of how can I use that in a unintended way for gain.
Okay, I know I said one last question, but I promise this is the last one. So David, in your opinion, what are the potential weaknesses in the current cybersecurity infrastructure?
So when you take a look at it, that's also could be a very long question. So when you look at cybersecurity as a whole, it's not that cybersecurity programs or CSOs get complacent. It's just that as all these technologies change and you start adopting new technologies, it's really, you need to be more introspective and take a look back at the fundamentals of the security program that you have for your institution. Because oftentimes it's the basic blocking and tackling that cause people significant pain. Because when you look at a lot of the breaches, and I won't name any of the ones that are named, but there's something called like the OWASP top 10, which lists out the 10 most common vulnerabilities that are coded into different applications and things like that. Year over year, that probably results in 70+% of the big breaches that you see from that point of view. So part of it is not necessarily how do I deal with esoteric things, but really focus on, do I have good security fundamentals, and then start building out. So that looks like, do I have good process? Do I have good governance? What control framework am I going to adhere to? What controls can I put into place? So it's more of thinking that through as a holistic approach rather than just procuring a tool thinking that that's going to protect you.
That's awesome. And thank you, David, for taking the time to answer all these questions that were asked by the attendees today. And I just want to pass it back on to Bruce and see if he has any last final comments.
Thanks, Crystal, and absolutely thanks, David, for taking the time to respond to our audience's questions. This is wonderful. It has been wonderful. So a couple of things we are looking at expanding our cybersecurity courses and offering and enhancing it and so forth. And I have always been trying to get David and to whenever he has time and say, hey, come over teach for us, right? And share his knowledge. And so I'm still working on that. And so I want to extend my invitation, in the public offer here. But the second thing is that I want to remind everyone that we just kicked off. This is our first monthly CXO Fireside Chat, right? And so we're going to be doing this on a monthly basis. So next month in April, at the last week of April, the end of April, we will be having the second CXO Fireside Chat. Now, our theme is going to be digital transformation, but the April one is also focused on cybersecurity. We are going to have the Chief Information Security Officer from Ring Central. Ring Central is the publicly traded company that focuses on cloud-based communications and collaboration solutions. Their Chief Information Security Officer, Heather Hinton, will be joining us for the Fireside Chat next month. So just calendar that, and I hope that you can join us next month as well. If you need more information concerning about our cybersecurity courses and offering, and you can always visit our website, and other than that, thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you for spending the time, and David. And so before I wrap it up, I'm gonna let you have the last word here, that a word of wisdom and that encouragement for people that who are new to the field or wanted to get into the field. And so what's the word?
So, well, one, thanks for having me, and always happy to join you to teach. Really, it's, cybersecurity, risk, compliance, there's huge amounts of opportunities in it. So there is no perfect time to start. There's always a good time, from that point of view. And it doesn't really matter where you are from a career point of view, because literally cybersecurity opportunities are available from entry level all the way up through the senior executive status from that point of view. I think, as Bruce mentioned, there's 3+ million unfilled jobs expected by the end of this year. So there's great opportunity, especially if you love learning. So I collect degrees. Bruce definitely has me out degreed right now, but I'm working on it. So from that perspective, happy to have been a guest, and always happy to teach with you. So.
Thank you, David, and thanks everyone. Thanks, Crystal, and for helping us and monitoring the sessions and helping with the Q&A. And we also want to thank Kristen for helping us and on the Facebook live stream site. And so thanks everyone. See you next month.
Thank you.